Hello guys and gals, and welcome. Today we've got a news update for you for Diablo 2 Resurrected, and currently we are on the Diablo 2 Resurrected 2.5 public test realm, which has been updated to the newest version. In this version, we have access to a new set of charms, grand charms, that has been added specifically for the new season. And we have information on these charms. We've gone over them. We've done some testing. So I'm here to unload all of that on you. So be sure to hit the like and subscribe button because we're going to dig into these charms. Now, first off, let's just go over what the charms do. So the first charm is the Bone Break Grand Charm. And this one specifically is for monster physical immunity. What it does is it sets the monster's physical immunity to 95% if they are immune. It does not do anything further than that. Now, it also decreases your physical resistance by 25%. So when you put this charm on your character, you will notice that your damage reduced by is actually increased, essentially. Notice that I go from damage reduced by 10% to damage increased by 15%. So now we are taking more damage than we would otherwise normally. We also have the Black Cleft Grand Charm, which is monster magic immunity is Sundered. Sundered is the new term that they are using, by the way. Sundered is essentially a ability that causes the monster's resistance to be capped essentially at 95%. So they cannot go any higher essentially than 95. That's what all of these charms do, the magical effect of all these charms. However, the Black Cleft Grand Charm also has a pretty massive negative of magic resistance, negative 50%, which could potentially get you killed in quite a few scenarios that I can think of in my head. Most namely things like the Bone Spirit fired from the Chaos Knights in Chaos Sanctuary, the Bone Spears fired from the Bone Spear Snakes, the Dark Stars fired from the Herodrum, and so forth and so on. Magical damage effects tend to be the most damaging effects in the game because you really don't have any resistances to them, and having a negative in that particular category could lead to your death. We also have the Crack of the Heavens, which is absolutely hilarious, and I love that name, and I hope they don't change it. The Crack of the Heavens is the same thing. It is lightning immunity is Sundered, so 95% resistance is the highest that the monster will go. You will also get a massive negative 75% lightning resistance. We have the Cold Rupture Grand Charm, which is monster cold immunity is Sundered. Cold resistance negative 75%. And we same thing with the fire immunity is Sundered, and fire resistance negative 75%. And then finally the poison resistance immunity Sundered, poison resistance negative 75%. Now, one of the things we did talk about with these is that there's obviously going to be a value that is going to be assigned to these, a trade value when these are actually brand new. So we've kind of me and Skull, we've kind of figured out what we thought was the trade value of these items based on their current status. So at the moment, the Black Cleft Grand Charm is most undoubtedly going to be the least valuable charm in the pile. The poison is most undoubtedly going to be the second lowest as far as value is concerned. And this is not necessarily because it's useless, but more so that it has less useful builds that it can be applied to. The cold charm is definitely going to be the most valuable out of the lot, specifically because cold immunes cannot be broken otherwise, whereas there are other methods to break most of the other resistances in the game. And there are a lot of cold immune monsters, and there are characters specifically that can take advantage of this charm, most namely the Sorceress, using Cold Mastery. We also have the Flame and the Lightning charm, which I feel are pretty much dead center. They're kind of tied for the second place. And then we have the Bone Break charm, which I do feel like deserves a good spot and may actually be tied for second place, but could potentially fall a little bit lower than the Fire and the Lightning, but undoubtedly is still number 3. Now, we've done a lot of testing with these so far, and we've come up with a lot of answers. Number 1, the Sundering does not affect mercenaries, it does not affect minions, and it does not affect traps. It also does not affect hydras. So this monster lightning immunity is sundered, only affects you. That's it. And this does mean, however, that that they have limited usefulness on things like trap assassins, Hydra sorceresses. They don't work very well with summon necromancers, and so forth and so on. So it's definitely important to keep that in mind. They do work with Holy X auras, so we did test to make sure that they work with Holy Shock, Holy Fire, and Holy Freeze. The next thing that we're going to go over is the fact that you can fit multiple on the same character. So obviously, as you can see here, I have multiple on my character at the same time, which may not be the brightest idea in the world, because now I am rocking negative 75% cold, negative 75% fire, negative 75% lightning, negative 25% physical resistance, negative 75% poison, and negative 50% magic, which makes me extremely vulnerable to damage of every single type. And quite honestly, is going to make things absolutely nasty. The other interesting thing here is that you can apparently put multiple on your character. Not that you would ever really want to. I don't know why you would want to put multiple of the same type on your character. Now, this may change, of course, and I hypothesize this because there has never been a charm in the game that has been unique that you can put multiple on the same character of. I don't know if this is potentially something that they are going to work out at the end of PTR, and we may see it change, so do keep that in mind. Because the Annihilus Charm, Geeds, and the Hellfire Torches are, of course, all one per character. So we don't know whether or not these will eventually go to one per character as well. Another interesting aspect of these is that while they do increase some of the more powerful builds in the game, they are also opening the door to a lot of characters that are relatively unused. And the reason why they are relatively unused is because, well, they have always had issues with immunities. Take, for instance, the Fire Druid, the Fire Amazon, the Cold Amazon. I mean, I could literally write a list that goes on for quite some time. The Phoenix Strike Assassin, like the Poison Necromancer is going to get benefit from this. The Fireclaw Druid. I mean, there are tons of characters in this game that have kind of been suppressed as far as meta is concerned that I feel are definitely going to rise to the top of this particular scenario. You may see a lot of characters that don't necessarily get played on a regular basis actually see game time. Now, granted, things like the Javazon with the lightning, things like the Blizzard Sorceress with the cold are definitely still going to be very popular. But I do feel like a lot of non-meta builds are going to find their way to the top with the addition of these items. Another thing that we were able to test successfully is whether or not these will sunder uber minions. So one of the things in the game that has been always unbreakable, no matter how much negative resistance you apply to the target, has been the Uber minions. So if you guys don't know what I'm talking about, inside of Uber Tristram, as well as inside of the 3 Uber zones where you fight Uber Iswal, Uber Duriel, and Lilith, there are monsters that have immunities that cannot be broken. So even if you have max level conviction, you have max level lower resistance, and you cast both of them on the target at the same time, their resistances will not break. And this has caused a lot of issues for a lot of characters who are trying to do Ubers, specifically sorceresses and things like that are, usually having a lot harder time in areas with tons of immunities. And we tested to make sure that the immunity was in fact reduced to 95% in those zones. This means that characters that were unable to do Ubers in the past due to the immunity issues can actually now possibly do the Ubers if they build their characters correctly. Of course, having a huge negative resistance is definitely going to make it a little bit more difficult to build a balanced character in an area where you're going to be under the effect of conviction by Mephisto. But it's possible now where it wasn't possible before. So like a cold sorceress could never effectively kill the pit lords because they were always immune to cold and unbreakably so. A lightning sorceress could never kill those pit lords either for the same reason. But now using these charms, you can effectively break the immunities of those monsters. There's also a lot of other little things here that we don't know. We don't know how rare these are going to be. This is definitely a big question in my mind, and I feel like this is important to figure out. I would like some kind of idea from Blizzard as to the rarity of these. And I also kind of want to put in my input that I feel like these need to be not common, but not ridiculously rare. Like, if we say Mang Songs is like the most ridiculously rare item to find in the game, and Geeds is a relatively common grand charm that everybody usually has one of by the time they finish ladder, this needs to be somewhere in the middle. It needs to be more rare than Geeds, and it needs to be less rare than Mang Songs. A little bit more feedback also. I feel like they could add a little bit of variance to these to make it more interesting, to make trading them more interesting, so that, like, you know, you could potentially find one that's perfect and maybe find one that's not perfect, and you would, of course, seek out a more rare version. For instance, they could increase the negative resistance on these and make it a variable. So it could roll between, say, 75% would be the perfect, and then maybe like 125% would be like the anti-perfect. And then it would roll in between those numbers, and then you'd get excited because you found like an 80% or something like that. You know, you'd gotten one closer to the perfect value. I definitely feel like that would be an interesting mechanic that could be added very easily to these charms and would increase their value while also making trading them more interesting. So where can you potentially find these? The answer to that question is you can find them only in Terror Zones, and you can find them only from champions, elites, and rare monsters, which means they're not going to drop from trash mobs, which is relatively interesting. The Black Cleft Grand Charm, I feel like we need to talk about how terrible this charm is. Out of all of these charms, it is by far and very easily the worst of the 6. And the reason why it is the worst is because, well, unlike poison, physical, lightning, fire, and ice, there is no form of negative enemy magic resistance within the game. So setting a monster's resistance to 95% doesn't necessarily really do anything, because you're essentially causing the monster to be 95% resistant to your attack, which still effectively means that they're relatively unkillable, unless you have an insanely high level of damage. And I think I calculated it out earlier, and we were looking at like a 13k hammered in would be doing like 600 damage to a target using this charm if they were immune. And then on top of that, not only does it really not offer any huge bonus for those characters, it also has probably the worst negative out of all of the charms. While cold resistance, fire resistance, lightning resistance, physical resistance, and poison resistance can all be countered using a myriad of items, effects, and skills, there is no effective way to counter negative magic resistance. So it is in a class by itself, and having negative 50% magic resistance can effectively murder you. In fact, I would assume that, like, for instance, in hardcore, you'll probably never see anybody actually using this charm. It literally will be like a cursed object that they won't pick up because they'll be afraid that they'll get hit by a bunch of bone spears and die while it's in their hands. And maybe it could get utilized, you know, just sort of like in your cube, and then if you absolutely need it, you take it out and use it for like 10 seconds, and then you put it right back in your cube. but like it doesn't really have a lot of good uses as far as I'm concerned. Now, granted, the one thing that it could potentially allow you to do is kill the magic immunes that are inside of Uber Tristram. And that's like the only good use that I can think of off the top of my head. And then we have the physical immune one, which I feel like we need to talk about for a minute. The physical immunity Sundered one is an interesting one because it doesn't necessarily fix your issue. It will set the monster to 95% immunity, but you're going to need another way to break it. And this brings me to the next topic that we need to talk about. So how do these charms interact with auras and curses? All right, so as we've tested, the answer to that question is this. They apply before everything, but only to you, okay? So if you are fighting, say, a monster that is immune to fire, and you have the fire charm, so you're utilizing the Flame Rift Grand Charm, it will set the monster's immunity to 95% for you, and for you only, and when a player, or you, or a mercenary, applies conviction or lower resistance to the target, it will modify it as if it is a 95% value without penalty. Which means that, say for instance, you had a player who has negative 150% conviction. You are looking at 95% minus 150%, which is going to bring that monster down to negative 55% resistance with the combination of the two. But again, only for you. This is unfortunate, of course, because Trap Assassins are not going to be able to get this effect. Hydra Sorceresses will not get this effect. Summon Necromancers will not get this effect. They will get the regular conviction at its regular rate, and it will be applied with the penalty on the immune monster, not without the penalty that this allows. So, all in all, this patch is very interesting. It definitely does offer some very cool items that can potentially shake up the meta quite a bit, as far as I'm concerned. I don't know specifically if we're going to have everyone flocking to characters that are non-meta, but I do feel like it has potentially opened the door on a huge variety of builds that relatively have went untouched before. On top of this, we also have just the interesting capability of combining these in multiple ways. So if they do allow us to have multiple, which I'm not sure if they are or not, so let's keep that on the table. We also have the interesting idea of using multiple on a single character to get the benefit of both. So let's say, for instance, you had a Corpse Explosion Necromancer. Corpse Explosion is physical and fire, so you might necessarily want to use the Bone Break Grand Charm for the physical sundering and the Flame Rift Grand Charm for the fire, so physical and fire. Same thing for an Elemental Druid. Elemental Druids are either physical and fire for the fire side of the tree, or they're physical and cold for the cold part of the tree. So you could potentially use both of these to break two of the elements. Earlier, I tested out a very crazy build, which is where I used the Bone Break Grand Charm, the Cold Rupture, the Crack of Heavens, and the Flame Rift, all on a Vengeance Paladin, just for laughs to see how well it would work out. And in combination with Conviction, every single monster that I came across was broken down to negative 55% resistances, or lower, depending on what they were before. And I was pretty much just one or two shotting just about every monster in the game, which was pretty funny. Although the combined negative resistances that I incurred from using 4 of these together was pretty insane. And it did hurt a lot, especially when I came across some monsters that were very ouchy. And I did die, so there's also that. And the same thing goes for like the Poison Charm. You could be utilizing that in combination with another character. Like for instance, maybe you're running a Rabies Druid. Maybe you are running a Poison Necromancer who also uses Corpse Explosion. There are definitely multiple ways that you could be utilizing multiple charms. Maybe you're a dual spec sorceress. Maybe you're a fire / cold sorceress. Although these charms, very interestingly, will certainly allow you to forego dual specking. But the level requirement on these, which is level 75, kind of indicates that you wouldn't necessarily be able to build your character directly with these in mind. So you're still going to have to level up your character the normal way, up to the point where you get your hands on one of these. And then once you get your hands on one of these, then you can maybe respec into a more singular build, which could be interesting. All in all, I'm actually pretty excited about these charms. I think they're a very interesting addition to the game. They definitely open the door for more builds, which is what I've always wanted from the very beginning. I've always wanted people to get out there and have fun playing characters, whether they were meta or not. And these charms, I think, provide a very interesting way that you can build characters that you might not necessarily ever wanted or could build before, specifically because they just weren't really powerful enough. The other interesting thing that I find about these charms is that they don't necessarily fix the problem for you. It's not like a I win button. Many people would probably say that about an infinity. Like once you obtain infinity, it is pretty much like an I win button. You pretty much just put it on and you've won the game. Whereas obtaining one of these doesn't really have the same effect. Because these specifically only set the monster's resistance to 95%, they don't necessarily fix your problem. You need other pieces of equipment with negative enemy lightning resistance, lower resistance, conviction, or multiple other things that you could possibly be running, like amplify damage, decrepify, that will lower the resistance further down from the 95% level to make these effective. And I think in that way they're actually genius, because they're good, but they're not so good that they fix every single problem that you have. You still have to obtain other items, like Wizen Draw, with negative 35% enemy cold resistance, facets that have negative 5% resistance, or like Crescent Moon that has a negative enemy lightning resistance, or Griffin's Eye, and so forth and so on. And in combination with those other items, like Flickering Flame, for instance, you will obtain the effect that you're looking for. And I think that's what's important. I'm not sure if I stated it or not, but they don't work in PvP. Not that I think they would actually do anything in PvP, except for reduce your resistances. Although it could be a very interesting form of PvP play to put these on to reduce your resistances down, specifically for like just masochist PvP. So masochist PvP would be like what? Just you get one of every kind. Like that's the PvP. You have to have one of every kind in your inventory, and then you go out into like normal difficulty and just get like annihilated, so that everybody is one shot and everybody. Just call it like the one shot PvP land. That would be hilarious, wouldn't it? Just like have a bunch of, I don't know, like ice sorceresses, right? And then everybody fills their inventory with cold rupture grand charms, and everybody just has fun murdering each other with all the ice skills. Or, like, or everybody plays a bone necromancer and everybody fills up their inventory with black cleft grand charms, and you just run around just, like, murdering everybody with, like, teeth. Like, you literally, your resistances are so low that you're dying from teeth. I don't know, it could make for a very interesting, like, silly PvP game. Anyway, as always, I do appreciate you guys and gals watching my videos. And tell me what you think about these charms, either good or bad. Do you hate them? Do you love them? Do you want to take them home and marry them and for them to be your wife? Probably the Crack of Heavens is the one you're going to take home to be your wife, aren't you? Yes. I saw you looking at that Crack of Heavens. Anyway, as always, thanks for watching, and keep watching.